The unexpected encounter. The stars of the Milky Way stretched out endlessly before Captain Ethan Sullivan, their distant light flickering like the heartbeats of forgotten gods. The moon of Gathar, a desolate rock in the far reaches of the galaxy, was silent, save for the hum of the human colony nestled within its craggy cliffs. The colony was small, its buildings carved into the stone, a modest settlement against the vastness of space. Yet, to Ethan, it was home, a home he would defend with every breath in his body. Humanity had always been the underdog in the universe. It had been centuries since humans made their first hesitant steps into space, and now they were scattered among the stars, carving out their place in the cosmos. But peace was a fragile thing, and the universe, vast and unknown, was never kind to those who were weak or unprepared. And now, they were about to face an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered, the Valkyrie, a brutal, technologically advanced alien race that had dominated planets and civilizations far older than humanity's. The Valkyrie were warriors, their empire built on the backs of countless conquered worlds. To them, humanity was an insect, no more than a tiny nuisance to be crushed beneath their boots. They had already destroyed entire colonies and vaporized any resistance in their path. But they hadn't expected the humans of Gathar. The Valkyrie were led by Lord Calrath, a towering figure whose reputation for ruthlessness had spread across the galaxy. His fleet, an armada of warships the size of cities, had arrived in orbit above Gathar's moon with a single purpose: annihilation. They had come to strip humanity of its resources and enslave its people. They did not ask for surrender. They simply demanded it. And when the humans refused, the Valkyrie began to prepare for the inevitable slaughter. Ethan stood at the command center of the colony, his eyes scanning the holographic map before him. The Valkyrie fleet was in position, and their warships hovered ominously over the moon's surface. The humans were outmatched. The Valkyrie's weapons were far superior, their technology light years ahead of anything the humans could muster. Yet, despite the odds, Ethan remained resolute. There was no retreat. There would be no surrender. He had led his people through thick and thin, through the cold reaches of space and the harsh conditions of the moons they had colonized. But this was something different. His mind raced, thinking about the lives at stake, the families who had made Gathar their home, the children who played in the narrow streets and fields. They had no idea what was coming, but Ethan did. He had faced battles before, but never one like this. At that moment, the door to the command center slid open with a sharp hiss, and Lieutenant Mira Tannen stepped inside, her face grim. "Captain," she said, her voice steady but filled with concern. "The Valkyrie have begun their descent. They're landing their shock troops now." Ethan nodded, taking in her words. "What about the defenses?" "We've got the laser turrets in place, but they won't last long against their shields. We're outmatched, Captain." They'd brought enough firepower to level the entire colony. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his resolve never wavered. "We don't need to outgun them. We just need to outthink them." Mira frowned, confused. "Outthink them, sir. With all due respect, they're an advanced race. How are we supposed to outthink them when they have the weapons to destroy us in seconds?" Ethan turned to face her, his blue eyes intense. "Humans may not have the tech or the numbers, but we have something they don't: our will. We're adaptable, we're resilient, and we know how to survive. We'll use that. They've underestimated us." The lieutenant looked at him, doubt still flickering in her eyes, but she nodded. "Understood, Captain. We'll follow your lead." Ethan turned back to the map, eyes narrowing as he thought about the strategy that would allow them to stand a chance. It wasn't going to be a conventional fight. They didn't have the resources for that. But what they did have was cunning, an unpredictable factor that even the most advanced alien race couldn't account for. If they could turn the Valkyrie's strength against them, they might just have a chance. "Prepare the troops," Ethan ordered. "We fight smart, not hard. We use the terrain to our advantage. And when the time comes, We'll make sure they regret underestimating humanity." The command center erupted into a flurry of activity as the humans readied themselves for the fight of their lives. The Valkyrie were descending with overwhelming force, but Ethan knew something they didn't. Humans were survivors. They had faced impossible odds before, and they had always come out on top. This would be no different. As the Valkyrie shock troops landed, their massive forms disembarking from their sleek ships, the humans of Gathar gathered in their hidden positions, preparing for the onslaught. Each soldier knew their role, each individual aware of the danger that loomed over them, but none of them wavered. They stood ready to defend their world, their homes, and their people. When the first wave of Valkyrie soldiers stormed into the colony streets, they were met with resistance that caught them off guard. The humans had set traps, used guerrilla tactics, and struck where the Valkyrie least expected. And despite their superior strength and technology, the Valkyrie found themselves struggling to maintain control. It wasn't the kind of battle they had imagined. It wasn't about overwhelming force. It was about outwitting their enemy at every turn. Among the chaos, Ethan Sullivan was everywhere at once, leading his troops, coordinating attacks, and most importantly, staying one step ahead of the enemy. He had studied the Valkyrie for years, their tactics, their psychology, and he had learned one thing that gave him hope. They were predictable. They relied on brute force, on their superior technology, and on the assumption that no one could ever match them. But Ethan had a plan, one that would exploit their overconfidence. And when the time came, he would unleash it, taking them completely by surprise. As the Valkyrie pushed deeper into the colony, Ethan took a deep breath and made his move. The humans would fight, not with brute force, but with strategy, with ingenuity, and with everything they had. This would be the beginning of a war unlike any other. And in that moment, as the first human lives were sacrificed in the defense of Gathar, Captain Ethan Sullivan made a vow to himself. They would fight, they would survive, and they would never be broken. This was their world, and they would not surrender it to anyone. The first strike. The battlefield on Gathar's moon was alive with chaos, a blur of fire and dust. The once peaceful colony had transformed into a war zone in a matter of hours. Ethan Sullivan could hear the hum of energy shields, the crackle of weapons fire, and the stomping of Valkyrie soldiers' heavy boots as they advanced. But despite the overwhelming odds, the humans were holding their ground. They were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting to prove something. That humanity was more than a footnote in the history of the universe. Ethan crouched behind a stone outcrop, his pulse steady as he surveyed the advancing Valkyrie troops. His mind raced, calculating the next move, assessing their weaknesses. The Valkyrie, though formidable, had one flaw. They were predictable. They relied on brute force, their technology, and their overwhelming numbers to crush any resistance. But humans weren't like that. Humans adapted, they improvised, and most importantly, they thought on their feet. The first wave of Valkyrie shock troops was massive, their heavy exosuits glowing with the energy of their advanced technology. These soldiers, though fierce and intimidating, were not accustomed to fighting in the rugged terrain of Gathar's moon. The humans had planned for this, setting traps, using the moon's rocky landscape to their advantage. Ethan's voice crackled over the comms, steady and calm. All units, fall back to secondary positions. Let them think they're pushing us back. Then we strike. The humans did just that. As the Valkyrie pushed forward, the humans withdrew into the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the surface of the colony. The Valkyrie, hungry for victory, took the bait and advanced further into the heart of the colony. They thought they had the upper hand. They were wrong. Ethan led a small group of elite soldiers through the tunnels, each of them armed with high-tech, human-engineered weapons that had been specifically designed to counter the Valkyrie's armor. They were silent, moving like shadows through the underground network. They would strike quickly and decisively, and then vanish back into the labyrinth. The moment came when the Valkyrie's forward lines were deep inside the colony. Unaware of the trap, Ethan raised his hand. signaling his team to stop. The tunnel they were in led directly to a massive chamber beneath the colony's central plaza. It was the perfect place to make their stand. "On my mark," Ethan whispered into the comms. "Wait for the signal." There was no sound but the soft echoes of their breathing as they waited. Tension hung in the air, thick and palpable. Ethan's mind was laser-focused, every nerve on edge. This was their moment. They had to take it. Finally, the signal came. A faint blip on the comms, the sound of Valkyrie footsteps growing closer. Ethan's hand shot up, and without a word, his team sprang into action. The chamber erupted into chaos. The Valkyrie soldiers, caught completely off guard, were met with a barrage of fire. The humans fired in perfect synchrony, each shot aimed to disable, not kill. The human weapons were designed specifically for this, to break through the Valkyrie's powerful exosuits and leave them vulnerable without fatally wounding them. The first line of Valkyrie soldiers fell, their shields flickering out as their suits malfunctioned under the precise strikes. The humans didn't stop there. Ethan had anticipated this, and while the Valkyrie were reeling from the ambush, he had a second team positioned to cut off their retreat. The soldiers moved quickly, like a wave crashing over the stunned Valkyrie. The aliens fought back with ferocity, but the humans were relentless. The Valkyrie's overwhelming firepower was neutralized by the surprise and speed of the attack. Their suits weren't designed to handle guerrilla warfare in tight spaces like this. Ethan's team, though outnumbered, used their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. They darted through the narrow tunnels, striking from multiple directions, keeping the Valkyrie off balance. Ethan himself fought with a level of calm that came only with experience. His blade flashed in the dim light of the tunnels, a swift arc that disabled a Valkyrie soldier before the alien even had a chance to react. "We've got them on the run," one of Ethan's soldiers said, his voice full of disbelief. "They didn't expect this." "No," Ethan replied, his voice steady but filled with determination. "They didn't, but we can't let up now. This is just the beginning." The Valkyrie commander, a towering figure with armored plating that seemed almost indestructible, issued orders to his troops. He had underestimated the humans, thinking their tactics would be predictable. But now, as he watched his soldiers fall one by one, he realized the gravity of the situation. He knew that the humans were not just fighting for their survival, they were fighting for their future. And that made them far more dangerous than he had ever anticipated. "Regroup," the Valkyrie commander bellowed, but his words were lost in the chaos. The Valkyrie were disoriented, their advanced technology unable to keep up with the relentless ingenuity of the humans. For every Valkyrie soldier that fell, the humans moved like shadows, never staying in one place long enough to be caught. The battle raged on for hours, with the humans gradually gaining ground. They had not won yet, far from it. The Valkyrie were still a formidable force, and their reinforcements were on the way. But for the first time, the humans had proven something vital. They could hold their own. The Valkyrie had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. Back in the command center, Mira Tannen watched the battle unfold on the holographic display, her face a mixture of exhaustion and awe. She had seen Ethan lead his troops before, but never like this. The humans were not just fighting. They were winning. And the impossible was beginning to seem possible. "Captain," Mira said, her voice crackling with urgency, "we've got word from the front lines. The Valkyrie are falling back. We've made them retreat." Ethan's lips curled into a tight smile. "Not yet, but we've made them think twice." The Valkyrie forces weren't beaten. They were regrouping, preparing for their next assault. But in that moment, the humans had gained something far more valuable than ground. They had gained the upper hand. The Valkyrie now knew that humanity was not to be underestimated. As the sun dipped behind the distant horizon of Gather's moon, Ethan Sullivan stood tall, his eyes scanning the battlefield. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, humanity had proven that it could fight back. And that, Ethan thought, was enough to turn the tide in their favor. "We've won this round," Ethan muttered under his breath. "But the war is far from over." The fight for Gathar had just begun. But the humans were ready, and they were not backing down. The hidden strength. The war was far from over, but Ethan Sullivan's small victory had already sent ripples through the human colony. The Valkyrie had learned something crucial that day. Humanity was not an easy target. Underestimating the humans had been their first mistake. But the Valkyrie were quick learners, and they would not make the same error again. As the fighting subsided, a temporary, uneasy silence hung over Gathar's surface. The humans had managed to push back the first wave of invaders, but the larger Valkyrie fleet remained in orbit, looming above them like an eternal shadow. In the aftermath of the ambush, Ethan's team regrouped in one of the colony's underground bunkers, the flickering light of their dim comms panels casting long shadows against the stone walls. Their faces were covered in sweat, some streaked with dirt and blood, but there was something else in their eyes, something that had been missing before. It was hope. Hope that perhaps the Valkyrie weren't as invincible as they had believed. Mira Tannen approached Ethan, her expression serious. She looked at the others in the room before speaking in a hushed tone. "Captain, we've secured the main passageways, but we're getting reports of new Valkyrie units landing. They're not just soldiers anymore. They've brought in their war machines. Mechs, tanks, the whole arsenal. We're still outnumbered." Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the tactical map displayed in the air before him. The Valkyrie had barely begun to show their full hand, but the humans were prepared for this. They had to be. "They'll keep coming," Ethan said, his voice steady, "but they won't expect us to adapt as quickly as they do. We've learned from this first round, and now we'll force them to learn from us." Mira didn't say anything at first. She had been with Ethan through every mission, every fight. She trusted him completely. But even she couldn't deny the scale of the challenge ahead. The Valkyrie were relentless, and they were beginning to retaliate with everything they had. Still, there was something about Ethan's calm that reassured her. "We've got two choices," Ethan continued. "We can dig in, build defenses, and wait for the inevitable, or we can take the fight to them. I vote for the second." "Are you suggesting we go on the offensive?" Mira asked, raising an eyebrow. "With what? We don't have the resources to launch a full-scale counterattack." Ethan turned to face her fully, his gaze unyielding. "We don't need resources. We need ingenuity. The Valkyrie are not invincible. They've relied on brute force, and they expect us to cower under their pressure. But they're not used to fighting the way we do. Humanity's greatest strength isn't in its weapons. It's in its adaptability, its resilience. I'm going to show them that." He stood, walking over to a large tactical console, his fingers tracing the virtual map of the colony and the surrounding moon's surface. His plan was simple. If they could outsmart the Valkyrie, they could turn their overwhelming numbers and strength against them. The humans had knowledge of the terrain. They had the element of surprise, and they had something that no alien invader could possibly anticipate: the human drive to survive at all costs. "We can use their own arrogance against them," Ethan said, more to himself than to Mira. "They believe they can crush us with their technology, but we've already proven we're not so easily beaten. They will come to think we're weak, that we're simply trying to survive. But we'll make them think they've won before we strike. I want them to underestimate us again. We'll lead them into a trap they can't escape." Mira crossed her arms, nodding thoughtfully. "All right, Captain. I trust you, but we need more than just traps. If we're going to make them pay for underestimating us, we need something that'll hit them hard." "That's the second part of the plan," Ethan said, his eyes gleaming with determination. "We'll hit them where they least expect it, at the heart of their command center. I'm going to take a team in and cripple their communications. If we can break their coordination, we can turn the tide in our favor." The humans had already demonstrated their ability to disrupt the Valkyrie's dominance on the battlefield, but now Ethan's plan was going to take things a step further. It was time to exploit the weaknesses in the Valkyrie's arrogance, to show them that they were fighting a foe who could think on their feet, who would never back down. The Valkyrie had thought they would crush humanity in one swift blow, but they were sorely mistaken. Ethan's team, now reassembled, began making their final preparations. As they donned their gear and loaded their weapons, there was a fire in their eyes, a fire that hadn't been there before. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy, for the future of the human race. The Valkyrie, meanwhile, were growing more confident. They had dispatched multiple waves of soldiers to secure the colony's central plaza and its outer defenses. They had not expected any significant resistance from humanity, and so far, their tactics had been efficient. However, what they didn't know was that the humans were already inside their system, already working against them in ways the Valkyrie couldn't even begin to understand. "Commander, the humans are retreating to the northern sector," a Valkyrie officer reported to Kalrath, the supreme commander of the Valkyrie forces. "They are attempting to fortify positions there." Kalrath's expression darkened. "Let them retreat. We'll push them into a corner and finish them off once and for all. But make sure we take full control of their communications. I want no surprises this time." It was that very overconfidence that Ethan was counting on. The Valkyrie thought they had the upper hand, that the humans were already beaten. But Ethan had seen this before. This wasn't just a battle for territory. This was a battle of minds. And humanity had learned to fight with their brains as much as their brawn. The plan went into motion. As the Valkyrie advanced toward the northern sector, Ethan and his team infiltrated their command center, hidden deep beneath the colony's surface. They moved swiftly, silently, like shadows in the dark, never allowing the Valkyrie to notice their presence. The humans had studied every movement, every routine of their invaders. They knew how to bypass security, how to disable alarms, and how to leave no trace. As they reached the heart of the Valkyrie base, Ethan's heart beat faster, his mind focused on the task at hand. This wasn't just about breaking their communication systems. It was about sending a message to the Valkyrie. The message was simple. Humanity was not their prey. Humanity was a force to be reckoned with. "Get ready," Ethan whispered to his team. "Once we disable their systems, we'll strike at their heart. We can't afford to leave them any chance of regrouping." With a series of expertly coordinated strikes, Ethan's team incapacitated the guards, disabled the security systems, and launched their attack. The Valkyrie's communication networks were crippled, their ability to coordinate shattered. For the first time, the Valkyrie were forced to fight without the luxury of perfect coordination, without their usual tactical superiority. As the Valkyrie struggled to adapt, the humans began to capitalize on their disarray. They had turned the tables once again, using their resourcefulness and determination to exploit the cracks in the Valkyrie's ironclad strategy. Ethan stood in the heart of the now disrupted Valkyrie command center, the hum of the dying systems around him. The mission had been a success, but this victory was just a small step in a much larger war. The Valkyrie had learned one thing for certain: humanity was a force to be reckoned with, and for every time they underestimated the humans, they would pay a steep price. The war was far from over, but the Valkyrie had learned a lesson they would not soon forget. Humanity, in all its unpredictability, would never back down. The fight was just beginning.